The 2025 edition of How to Train Your Dragon is directed by Dean DeBlois, who actually did the original How to Train Your Dragon back in 2010 with Chris Sanders. So interestingly, now there are two movies that they worked on which have gotten live action treatments recently, this and Lilo and Stitch a couple of weeks ago. And you know the story of How to Train Your Dragon at this point. You once again follow Hiccup, played in this by Mason Thames, who is a Viking, but only in name. He is not quite on the level of the village of Burke, and everything that's going on with the rest of the citizens is far greater. However, he really wants to capture a dragon and impress his father in the process, and eventually he does capture a Night Fury, but it turns out he has an endearing relationship built with this dragon, and he comes to a realization that maybe these things that we've been hunting, they're better than we realize. So in a lot of ways, it's exactly the same as the original 2010 movie. Now, I love those animated movies. I think all three of them were actually pretty phenomenal, and I've seen them multiple times over. There's a lot of reverence I have for the How to Train Your Dragon movies, and I've also read Cressida Cowell's books. I've read the initial books, but I haven't read the entire thing. But there is clearly a lot of love when it comes to this franchise, and so going into a live-action remake of it, I think most people would be pretty skeptical and concerned because the track record when it comes to live action adaptations is not particularly great. However, this one is also, again, directed by the man who worked on the original, and so there is some hope when it comes to something like that. And having seen this version of How to Train Your Dragon, this is going to be a very paradoxical review, because in some ways, it's exactly the same movie. Actually, in most ways, it's exactly the same movie. 95% of the animated version is in this live-action version. And I don't just mean that in terms of the story, I also mean that in terms of the way the shots are framed and the visuals, how they look. There is very similar things going on over here, and so much of it is shot for shot, beat for beat, exactly like the original. There are a couple of things that are reframed and changed around, or maybe a dialogue here and there that's been removed, but beyond that, you get the exact same thing, except now it's in photorealistic form. I will say that the CGI, for the most part, is pretty good, especially in the close-up moments with Hiccup and Toothless, when they're having those interactions, it's once again recaptured quite nicely, with the cinematography from Bill Pope doing a fairly decent job in some of those moments. Particularly in the flight sequences, there's a few really great moments over there. And that's another thing. When it comes to recapturing a lot of those moments, like the very iconic test drive sequence now for a lot of people with John Powell's score playing over it, it's hard to not have a tear shed over that moment even now. It is a beautifully done moment, and they got that thing again. Which kind of leads to an overarching argument then, which is, why does this version exist? And the real answer to that is pretty simple. The studio wanted that version. They wanted to have a live action version, so I'm guessing that they did this, and with Dean DeBlois' involvement, it makes it a little bit more faithful to that, and so you get essentially the same movie. But paradoxically, it also makes it feel like it doesn't really need to be there, because it doesn't exactly change up or do anything different than the original version did. It will make an interesting double feature though, because if you at some point of time decide to watch the animated version and the live action version back to back, you can play a very fun game of comparing how each shot looks in each version and how, if it's, better in one version, better in another version. Though I have a feeling that a lot of times you might just gravitate towards the animated version because there's things going on with colors and, moments over there, which, you can only do sort of like in animation. And there's certain gimmicks you can get away with in animation that might be a little tougher in live action. Like there's a ring of fire moment, which is in the animated version, where if you try to pull that maybe in this, it might be a little tougher to explain how you can sort of get through that in a fairly unscathed way. But beyond that, I feel like it's just one of those things where the viewing is a very bizarre and interesting one to have. I think the performances, though, for all the characters are pretty good. I thought Mason Thames did a really good job as Hiccup, very much channeling that original animated version. I thought Nico Parker as Astrid was really great, too. I really loved seeing Gerard Butler as Stoic the Vast once again. I thought he was awesome in the animated version as the voice, and to see him bring that physical embodiment of Stoic to life was very cool, too. too. I also liked Nick Frost as Gobber. I thought Gobber is one of those characters I really like in the original, and once again, really, really good over here. All the dragons are shown pretty nicely, and there are some great, like I said, great moments with them when it comes to the visuals of it all. And when it comes to landing the themes of the story and what it wants to go for, when it comes to the unlikeliness of Hiccup being a hero and then eventually, rising up to the occasion in a way that doesn't exactly conform to Viking, tradition, it is very interestingly handled. And, the idea of someone doing things differently rather than, trying to be something that, other people want you to be. So those themes do come across nicely. It's just, at the end of the day, you're also just watching it going like, I have seen this before. And in some ways, I have seen a better version of this before, because the animated version, I think, when you hit that the first time, there are points of this when you're watching the live action version where you're like, it's the same scene, but maybe it's not quite on the same level as the previous one was. Maybe it's because you're trying very close to mirror that. Maybe it's because it's just one of those things where it worked really well already. It doesn't really need to happen again. And yet, like I said, there are moments when that score kicks in and it's like, yep, I'm swept up in it again. There's that scene where Toothless draws, in the sand around Hiccup, and he has to have Hiccup walk over to him. Once again, I was watching that scene and it's like, yeah, this is getting me. There's that lump in your throat moment over there. It's beautifully done stuff. And so overall, I'm not saying How to Train Your Dragon 2025 is a bad movie by any means. It's actually a fairly good remake. I would say of the live action remakes, it's one of the best ones by far. It's just one of those things where I'm like, does it really, does it have to be there? Does it top the original? Not exactly. But again, it just makes for an interesting experiment and an interesting viewing experience. And in conclusion, it's kind of like that moment in Oppenheimer where it's like, is light made of particles or waves? Quantum mechanics says it's both. How can it be both? It can't, but it is. It's paradoxical, but it works. I'm gonna give How to Train Your Dragon 2025 a 7.5 out of 10. It's a fun time. Take your kids to it. You'll probably have some good memories, with them about that. If you're somebody who was a fan of the original one, you'll probably have a good time with it too. It's nowhere near as perfect as the original version was, but it's still a decent watch overall. Guys, thank you very much as always for watching. Look forward to more videos very, very soon. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the movies.